2024 is the undisputed best video games year of all time. For the current gen, despite all the doom and gloom and pessimism, gamers have had so much to be happy about right now, as the current gen seems to finally decided to start making some games. You may hear some crazy losers out and about complaining about the state of the games industry, throwing a big old tantrum about how bad things are, stomping their feet and insisting that this is one of the worst times ever to be a games developer or journalist. If you're looking for such a downer rant, check my link in the description where I break down why 2024 was in fact, actually, the worst year in gaming since E.T. But while you're here, let's be more positive. 2024 was a year where we went from nowhere near here to so overwhelmingly back, we cannot contain so much winning. The state of the gaming industry to a gamer is largely measured by a combination of two simple factors: a large quantity of games and a large quality of games. Using this, it is simple to understand poor or good years. A year with one or two really good games isn't going to be remembered fondly, just the games will be remembered. A year with many big-name AAA games that all flop also will not be remembered, or at least not for the right reasons. 2024, though, is absolute cinema, in many genres for many types of players. This is the year of needing to push half the games to next year, because there's more games in time. There's legit more this year than the rest of this gen from 2020 on. So despite the negativity some are pushing in gaming, I think we're in one of the best positions we can possibly be in. Now, journalists are having the worst year potentially ever, and there's a handful of devs who went to war with gamers and gamers won by just not showing up to the war to buy the games. Like Nintendo wins the console war by not participating. What we really saw was games that shroud themselves in messaging and hatred, they all failed, while games that were made with passion and with a focus on entertaining gamers soared to incredible heights. In 2024, all the games that had no intention of appeasing gamers, but were politically in line with journalists, failed miserably, while games that the journalists have grudges against found repeated victories. Gamers sent a very clear message to developers, and several developers answered. We've been told single-player games are no longer wanted by gamers. Just this year, we saw some very positive gamer response to just those types of games. Persona 3 Reload became Atlus's fastest-selling games, breaking 1 million sales in just a week. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was received extremely well and sold several million. Stellar Blade was an unexpected massive hit, a first attempt at a console game of this caliber by its developer, and sold over 2 million copies, prompting speculation of a likely sequel. Black Myth Wukong sold over 10 million copies in 3 days. Making it one of the biggest new IP hits of all time. Zenless Zone Zero had 50 million downloads in a month and made $100 million its debut month. Dragon's Dogma 2 sold over 3 million units in a month. Unicorn Overlord sold 500,000 in a month. Visions of Mana was great, though sadly Tencent shut down the studio at launch. Astrobot was Game of the Year, and is definitely an excellent game if you haven't played it yet. It very much has a retro feel of those old platformers. Elden Ring DLC naturally blew away expectations. Meeside, Balatro, Animal Well all showed off indie single-player game success. And on the far other side of the spectrum, we've been told live service games stand no chance, that the audience just doesn't want these types of games. Palworld has so much money the developers don't know how to spend it, and was a huge hit for being a very small indie game, yet it still managed to hit numbers that most AAA studios would be jealous of a year later. A little too jealous, sadly, as Nintendo looks to be the one threat to the game's existence. The First Descendant has potentially made $1 billion already, which absolutely kills the narrative around brand new IPs not having room to show up in the live service space. Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail, despite some criticisms, broke Final Fantasy XIV's player count record, so it clearly has done extremely well. Helldivers 2 has lost some steam by now, but nobody thought it was going to be anywhere near as powerful as it was when it came out, becoming an instant success and sold 12 million copies in just 3 months. Marvel Rivals and Path of Exile 2, do we even need to explain how massive these are? We had to listen to journalists cry about how Concord could never succeed because it's a live service hero shooter. Well, there's an entire list proving that was wrong just this year. Gamers prove we show up for good games and do not for trash made by developers who hate us. There is an abundance of top-notch games this year. Perhaps the best selection in decades. Hit after hit, huge variety, live service, and single player. And interestingly enough, almost every one of those games listed either was targeted by hit pieces and misinformation by journalists, with them all taking the same stance as they colluded to try to ruin games, including indie and AA studio-led games. For some examples, Eve from Stellar Blade being too attractive. IGN, for example, had many crude things to say about both the studio and the model for Eve, such as her not being possibly a real woman due to her form, and the director being someone who could never have seen a woman despite being married to one. The Wukong devs were called sexist by journalists in a lie they spread all year long, and there was a $7 million extortion fee demanded by consultants on threat of having journalists try to tar their studio's reputation if they didn't pay, according to reports. When it was revealed there was a harassment campaign targeting Wukong Studio if they refused to pay the protection fee, journalists, rather than disproving it, did exactly as was threatened and went after Wukong very hard. Journalists also went after Tifa for being too sexy in Rebirth. They went after Zenless Zone Zero's release, and of course they did their typical Elden Ring is too hard and full of ableism, and if you don't make an easy mode, that means you hate people with disabilities. You know, the same thing they do every Dark Souls style game. Yet, despite all the lies and hatred aimed at these small studios by the corporate journalists and the AAA studios they serve, gamers should be very proud for ignoring their nonsense and throwing massive support behind these games that respect them, making so many deserving games into major hits. The Journey to the West is a tale of the Monkey King, Wukong, as he defies the heavens and seeks immortality. And all along the way, the ruling powers attempt to block his progress and stifle his potential. They try to use all their influence and the power of the gods to crush the Monkey King. Yet every time they try to stop him, everything they throw at him makes him stronger. You may remember in Dragon Ball Z, every time a Saiyan nearly dies, he grows exponentially stronger. IGN attempted, with the help of all the other media outlets and their consultant firm pals, to destroy the monkey. They spread slander and lies, mistranslated what the developers said, and dug up dirt as far back as a decade in a desperate attempt to crush game science. Because game science did not bow. They did not pay the extortion fee of $7 million that was alleged to the consultants, which team up with journalists to bury studios. Just like Angry Beans attempted with Wukong, IGN and other journalists who believe themselves to have all the power in the gaming industry to pick which games succeed and which games fail, tried to interfere with the Journey to the West, but through determination and a refusal to buckle under intense pressure and assault from modern journalists, Wukong became one of the biggest games of all time. Who is behind these games being targeted? Stellar Blade, this is a mobile game company making their first big adventure game. Wukong, Game Science's first big global release. Palworld, small indie team with their first release. Balatro, single developer. Half the major successes this year, you likely have never heard of the company, and this is such an amazing thing for everyone. It shows from the ashes of the AAA industry burning itself to the ground, we are already seeing incredible growth with a AA and indie rebound. For Star Wars Outlaws, there were numerous reports that journalists were bribed, offered lavish vacations, free trips to Disneyland, and more, some getting multiple vacations in trade for a good review. And of course, the journalists, with their typical level of ethics, complied gleefully, heaping praise on the game and running defense against anyone daring to question their corporate masters. Allegedly. Well, Wukong has a mention of the fabricated sexism that a games journalist dug up from over a decade ago and then maliciously mistranslated, only to be immediately proven wrong. immediately called out on their lies, yet the journalist cartel continued to spread the lie even after being called out by putting it in every other article on the subject. Outlaws and Concord have journalists praising the games while writing hit pieces on gamers who have rejected it with extreme fervor. Yet despite the journalist cartel thinking they could play Kingmaker for corporate pals and Game Ender for studios who refused to be bullied, gamers had none of this, calling them out, refusing to entertain the journalist's lies, and turned games like Wukong and Stellar Blade into major wins, while filthy Ubisoft garbage, like Outlaws, completely failed. This is how the games industry wins. When great studios do well, when passionate developers are rewarded, and when lazy, hate-filled studios like BioWare and Ubisoft fail, it sets an expectation. And this is the expectation. A solid quantity of high-quality games for a wide range of players. Very simple, very straightforward. Show gamers respect, and gamers will buy your games. So let's mention just a few of the top-notch games that made 2024 the best year in gaming. Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, Tekken 8, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom, Persona 3 Reload, Helldivers 2, Balatro, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, Unicorn Overlord, Final Fantasy 14 Dawntrail, Dragon's Dogma 2, Rise of the Ronin, Princess Peach Showtime, Another Crab's Treasure, Stellar Blade, Animal Well, Wuthering Waves, Zenless Zone Zero, Shadow of the Erdtree, The First Descendant, Wukong, Visions of Mana, Space Marine 2, Lollipop Chainsaw Repop, Mouthwashing, Silent Hill 2, Dragon Ball Z Sparking Zero, Astrobot, Metaphor ReFantasio, Stalker 2, Infinity Nikki, Marvel Rivals, Meeside, Path of Exile 2, and Palworld. Have you played these? Were you overwhelmed and forced to put many in your to-do list for next year? Hopefully to get done before your huge game comes out next year. We have Kingdom Come 2, Monster Hunter Wilds, the full release of Path of Exile next year, Death Stranding 2, Doom Dark Ages, Gears E-Day, Elden Ring Night Rain, Civ 7, a new Pokemon, and I feel there might have been a really big game starting with a G. And there's always the potential for a big indie or AA surprise like Balatro, Palworld, or Wukong to come along as well. There's a great deal of pessimism in the games industry, especially if you listen to the media, but I think it's a fantastic place right now. AAA has intentionally left a gap for AA and indie to fill, and it is being filled. These new studios may be in the position that the current AAA was in 2 decades ago, but if we support them well, I think they'll be making AAA games by 2030, in a good way. And if they get bought out by BlackRock, they'll be making AAA games by 2030 in a bad way. But that's a worry for the future. For now, Happy New Year. Let's make 2025 just as good.